Chapter 68, The Night Palace. At this moment, all eyes fell on the palace maid. The majesty of the Son of Heaven is pressed down from above. For these people who knew that the emperor had life and death in his hands since they entered the palace, it was really a powerful deterrent and terror. Everyone could see that her face quickly lost its color, and her palms, which were tightly pressed against the ground, were clenched so hard that she seemed to be in a great struggle. She kowtowed to the ground in trepidation. "Back to the saint, there is no one behind the slave and maid, but I saw that the second girl Zhang was just a companion." But after entering the palace, she slandered and instigated the eldest princess and coaxed his royal highness, and everywhere was different from other companions. The slaves and maids were originally serving with all their hearts, but Her Royal Highness the eldest princess came out of her room and wanted to say that the slaves and maids were not good to serve, and that the internal affairs government was harsh. The slave maid was not angry for a while, and heard the news from the other palace that Wang Gonggong led people to check the palace, and the ghost came up with this plan to frame him. I also asked the Holy Lord and the Queen Mother to forgive. Bang dang! All the furnishings on the red sandalwood carved lacquer case were swept to the ground. Shen Lang is also a person who has experienced court disputes. How can he not see that this palace maid is lying, and immediately became angry, and said, "Nonsense, at this time, the thief's heart will not die." Wang Xinyi asked someone to drag her to the outer courtyard of the palace gate and beat her until she told the truth. Wang Xinyi was going to receive his order. Empress Dowager Xiao frowned at this time, glanced at the palace maid below, raised her hand slightly, pressed her temples, and sighed faintly. Wang Xinyi's footsteps immediately stopped. Shen Lang also looked at her. "Queen Mother, is there anything wrong?" Empress Dowager Xiao said, "At night, she openly fights and kills outside the palace gate, and the whole of the 6 palaces come to listen to her call. Originally, I didn't find out who was doing the ghost, but now that such a thread has been figured out, it is a matter of time before I touch the melon. Even if you want to interrogate, don't be at the gate of the palace, it's better to take someone to the punishment division." When Zhang Xuning heard this, she only felt sarcastic. This is suddenly no longer possible to fight and kill. Not long ago, the old witch waved her hand and drank people, and wanted to escort her to the court for interrogation, and the words she said were the same as Shen Lang's. "How long has it been since you forgot about it?" Zhang She's brows suddenly frowned slightly, and he glanced at the Queen Mother. Shen Lang came to his senses and said, "It's the son's negligence, forgetting that the Queen Mother is ill, and it is better to recuperate. Wang Xinyi, instead throw this palace maid to the Shen Penal Division, let them stop sleeping tonight, and ask me clearly." "Yes." Wang Xinyi is considered to be half of Zheng Bao's master, and he can mix in the position of the eunuch who holds the seal of the celebrant eunuch, and he has already become an old fox, and his eyelids with a few wrinkles were lifted, and he glanced at the little palace maid with a little pity, and waved his hand. The left and right immediately came up and escorted the palace maid away. A lump of cloth was immediately stuffed in his mouth, and when he was dragged out, he didn't even make a sound, only stared at a pair of frightened eyes in vain. Shen Lang looked down at Zhang Xuning from a high altitude and said, "Zhang Shilang was also considered to have done his best for the society and the court in the previous dynasty, although there was a reason for the incident today. It also made the second girl Zhang suffer a lot of grievances. Wang Xinyi, tomorrow you will go to the Internal Affairs Office in person, and someone will give him a reward to ease his heart. When the result of the torture by the Criminal Justice Division comes out, you will definitely be given justice." Zhang Xuning said, "The courtiers thank the Holy God for his grace. But she has a faint premonition in her heart that this matter is over, and this justice is probably impossible to get back." The person was escorted to the Criminal Justice Division for interrogation, but there was no result for a while. Sinaing Palace is the dormitory of Empress Dowager Xiao, and she wants to rest. At this moment, there are eunuchs and palace maids. Second, there are ministers who have been summoned to the palace to investigate the case, and third, there are companions who come to Yang's Hizai, and the personnel are chaotic. Shen Lang said, "Today's matter is over for the time being, let's all step down." And they all resigned in unison. The outermost eunuch and palace maid retreated first, then Yang's Hizai and a dry companion to read, and finally Chen Ying and Zhang Shat. As soon as he came out of Sinaing Palace, everyone surrounded Zhang Xuning. Fang Miao patted his chest vigorously, "Scared me to death, scared me to death." Zhou Baoying was adoring, "Sister Ning is too powerful in the palace." Even Yu couldn't help but say, "It's really to die." Chen Shi was cold, "Everyone else is fine, you are the only one who suffers in vain. It can be seen that you are not usually good at being a person, otherwise who can hate you and make fun of you like this?" Yao Rongrong looked at this, looked at that, and didn't dare to speak. Yao Shi is a cowardly look. Xiao Shu glanced at her, wrinkled her eyebrows slightly, and only reminded everyone, "If you have something to say, let's go back to Yang's Hizai and talk about it. If something like this happens, I can't control my mouth, how do you know if he will come out of his mouth in the future?" And they were silent. Zhang Xuning lowered her eyes from beginning to end and didn't say anything, and when she heard this, she just raised her head and glanced at Xiao Shu more. She was pressed with something on her mind. "I didn't take 2 steps forward, and I ran into Shen Zhu and Shen Ziai, who were hurrying towards Sinaing Palace from outside at this time." Shen Ziai's face was a little flustered, and when she saw them from a distance, she quickened her pace, walked in front of everyone, and looked at Zhang Xuning. "Ning is okay, right? This is obviously the news that I have heard." Shen Zhu also followed behind, looking at Zhang Xuning with some concern. "Is second Miss Zhang okay?" The brother and sister spoke almost in unison. Zhang Xuning originally wanted to say something comforting, but now she didn't know what to say, so she could only reply dryly, "There is no danger, there is nothing to do, everything is fine." Shen Zai breathed a sigh of relief. Shen Zhu looked at her with a deep worry in her eyes, thinking of what happened outside the palace tonight, and remembering Yan Lin's entrustment. She wanted to explain something to Zhang Xuning alone, and seeing that there were many people at the moment, she could only give up. Shen Zai turned her face and asked Xiao Shu, "Is the imperial brother here?" Xiao Shu looked at the panicked appearance of his brother and sister, as if he had sneaked away outside the palace, and only returned now, and only said, "The saint came here more than half an hour ago, and he hasn't left yet. So he should talk to the Queen Mother in Sinaing Palace." When Shen Zai heard this, she lifted the corner of her skirt and walked quickly to Sinaing Palace. Shen Zhu sighed heavily, but after all, he still didn't speak to Zhang Xuning, and hurriedly caught up with Shen Zai's footsteps. Zhang Xuning looked back and saw that the brother and sister were tall and short, and when they walked along the long palace road, they happened to take a look at Chen Ying and Zhang Shat, who came out from behind. The two stopped to salute. Shen Zai and Shen Zhu hurriedly returned the salute and went. Yang's Hizai is to the south, and the location is closer to the outer court, so the direction in which Chen Ying and Zhang Sha left the palace was originally the same as the direction in which the companions read back to Yang's Hizai, but in order to avoid suspicion, the two turned to another slightly farther road when they passed through the fork in the road. Zhang Xuning looked at the road and stood still. Fang Miao said strangely, "Second Miss Zhang." Zhang Xuning was listening to the voice in her heart that was constantly clear and reverberating, and when it disturbed her heart and set off waves, she suddenly made a decision, and only said, "If there are no Chen and Zhang today, I, Zhang Xuning, am only afraid that I will be in a different place, and I will thank you, you go first. Fang Miao's eyes widened. The crowd was also amazed. Yao Shi was even more stunned. Huo Ran raised his head to look at her. But Zhang Suning didn't look at anyone's expression, let alone explain anything for herself. She turned around after speaking, and went directly to the road that Chen Ying and Zhang covered away. Leave behind the crowd looking at each other. Chen and Zhang came out late, they were already behind them, and they didn't walk fast, so she quickly caught up. The little eunuch who carried a lantern to light the way for the two of them at night was the first to see her. Followed by Chen Ying and Zhang Shat. Zhang Suning stood behind the two, bowed, raised her head and said, "Thank you for the two adults for saving your life." The little girl took the liberty to come here to thank Lord Zhang. When Chen Ying heard this, his eyebrows were raised. "Thank you to Master Zhang, it's nothing wrong with me. He's a shrewd man. I had already received Xie Wei's reminder before, and I knew that there was something special about the second girl Zhang in front of me, and he was going to paddle, so he was not half dissatisfied with Zhang Suning's words, and said to Zhang Sha with a smile on his lips, "Master Zhang stays and talks first, and Chen Mao waits first." Zhang Sha was speechless. Chen Ying had already turned around and left with the little eunuch. At this moment, Zhang Suning felt very much like her previous life. It's just that the person who was very knowledgeable at that time and took the initiative to go was Xie Wei. Zhang Sha was dressed in an official uniform, with wide robes and large sleeves, and his hands folded in front of him, looking at her. There was some darkness around him, and his figure was darkened. Zhang Suning saw that Chen Ying was gone, so she took a step forward in his direction, but she didn't expect that this palace road was rarely walked on weekdays, and the corner of the originally paved stone bricks was warped out of the ground, just tripping her toes. What is the reaction in a hurry? His body suddenly lost his balance and fell forward. At this moment, Zhang She heard his heart say to himself, "Don't provoke her," but his hand so naturally went against his will, and completely subconsciously reached out and helped her. The 5 fingers with distinct bones are a little cocooned because of the perennial pin. When he held her arm, it was strong. The faint temperature of the palm of her hand penetrated through the fabric, as if it could be sensed by her skin. Zhang Suning almost threw herself into his arms. The forehead also hit his thin and angular jaw without paying attention, and it was hard, and it hurt a little. Zhang Sha does not use incense, and there is only a very light soap horn between the sleeves. But she covered her forehead in a daze, and when she raised her head to meet his dark eyes, she felt a strong aura surrounding her, which made her face hot. After a while, he reacted, and hurriedly retreated to stand still, opening up a polite distance. In the previous life, she acted presumptuously, and when she first met Zhang Shat, she always teased him when she had the opportunity to embarrass him, but later she was respectful and loving, but she didn't dare to do anything to him again. In this life, she really didn't want to leave a bad impression on Zhang Shat, and taught him to think that she was a frivolous person who was dissolute and threw herself into her arms at every turn. She was glad that the little eunuch had taken away the lantern, and the light was not good, otherwise the embarrassment of the crimson cheeks at the moment could not be concealed, so she secretly calmed down, and then said, "It's that I am uncertain today, and I didn't pay attention to my feet, thank you Lord Zhang." A sweet, soft, and fragrant fragrance suddenly moved away. Zhang Sha's 5 fingers were empty, and there was a cold wind passing through his fingers. He slowly curled up, hung down his palm, and said slowly, "It's all a matter of raising hands, and there is no need to thank you." This sounds familiar. He really looks like the previous life. But it's not the last life after all. She hasn't hurt him, she hasn't hurt him, she hasn't tired him of being in prison, tired of his widowed mother dying, everything can be a new beginning, and she didn't marry Shenju, and she didn't want to be a queen anymore. Jiang Xuning carefully hid all the secrets in the depths of her eyes, not letting them slip out quietly, and only looked at his figure and said, "The palace is sinister, full of ingenuity. Even Chen Chilang entered the palace today is just perfunctory, but Lord Zhang is willing to find out the truth, and Xuaning is much higher than the corpse vegetarian in this world." Zhang Xia was silent. After a long time, he said, "Xia Guan is just an outsider, Miss Zhang is in the bureau, so you should be careful in the future." "Is she also called Xiaguan at this moment?" Jiang Xuning felt that this person was really humble. She said, "That's natural, I have to stay in this palace for a while, I'm afraid of dying, how can I let them easily harm me?" The fingers that had fallen to his side were quietly clenched. She was afraid of death, and she was afraid of pain. When he was under siege of the palace at that time, what kind of courage should the former queen standing in front of him have to dare to give up his life and exchange his life? She was defenseless against him. Zhang Xia was suddenly afraid that he would stand here and watch her for too long, and shake his original determination, so he lowered his eyes and said, "Second Miss Zhang is on guard, it's late at night, and it's not good for the lower officials to stay in the inner palace for long, so I will leave first." Jiang Xuning's heart was empty. But on second thought, it was good to see him, and I shouldn't have asked for more. It was to bend the corners of his lips and look at him. I just didn't think about it. After walking out 2 steps, Zhang Xia's footsteps stopped. Jiang Xuning blinked, "Lord Zhang." Zhang Xia turned to look at her, as if he was hesitant to ask whether to ask, but finally spoke, "Second Miss Zhang and Miss Yao read together for Her Royal Highness the eldest princess, and I heard that there was a dispute over the matter below. Miss Yao has thought of all kinds of means because of her intention of cancel of the engagement of marriage between Ms. Yao and I, but I don't know if it's true or not. The dispute between her and Yao Shi and Yu Yu and Yang Zizai has already been spread, and it is all known to Zhang Xia." Jiang Xuning was stunned. "Then I thought that there is indeed no impermeable wall in the world, and it is not uncommon for it to be passed out. It's just that Zhang Xia asked at this moment, should she answer? Yao Shi had thought of all kinds of means and even wanted to splash people with dirty water, but it was true. But after all, she has selfish intentions, and if she says it to him, it will be like beating someone and reporting it. What if it's hidden?" The person who asked her this in front of her was none other than Zhang Xia. Jiang Xuning couldn't lie to him after all, but the word true couldn't be said for some reason. Or maybe it was a certain guess and expectation in her heart at that moment that pressed her, making her heart beat wildly and forgetting what to say. Zhang Xia looked at her and said, "I know." Jiang Xuning was taken aback, but Miss Yao doesn't think so now. If Master Zhang reads the letter she replied to, he should also know. Why ask? Zhang covered his eyes, and only said lightly, "Cancel the marriage engagement."